Hey everybody, this is a clip from the latest episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. If you want to check out the full podcast, check it out on the YouTube channel, Anchor, or Spotify. Hope you enjoy. And so today's topic comes from Star Wars Galactic, and this is the From the Crew segment that we're going to hear from you guys and what you guys want to talk about. So this is again from Star Wars Galactic. Thank you so much for submitting a topic, and I'm going to read out what he has to say, and we're gonna talk about it. So he says, it was announced recently that the casting details for a new Batgirl film are that Warner Brothers are looking for a new Jim Gordon and a Barbara Gordon / Batgirl. With us having two Jim Gordons, one in the DCEU, DC Extended Universe, and one in the Pattinson universe, wouldn't you say that it's a missed opportunity of not introducing Batgirl into the DCEU with there already being Batman, Ben Affleck, that's been in and hopefully, he says, going to be in a lot of future films in the DC universe? That's the first question. Because it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to do that instead of just starting a new DC universe altogether. And finally, on the subject of this topic, what are you hoping to see from a Batgirl movie? Thank you so much, Star Wars Galactic, for your question and topic. So there is actually a lot to discuss here, and I'm really glad because I think this issue runs just a little deeper than Batgirl and Batman in particular. So we'll break it down. So the first part of the question, so for those of you who don't know, it's been rumored for quite a while now that they being Warner Brothers, has been developing a Batgirl film. It's been in various stages of production, as have been a lot of the DC films, including The Flash. At one point, I do believe Joss Whedon was attached to it. Obviously, after the whole Snyder Cut debacle, I don't think that's the case anymore. But regardless, there were some rumors and rumblings that they're looking for a new Batgirl. And I'm not entirely sure if it's going to take place in the DCEU. It could very well. It could be in its own separate thing. But I think, so the first question that Star Wars Galactic is asking here is really, doesn't it make sense just to keep like a Batgirl in the DCEU instead? Like, why are we making a completely separate one when we have, the Ben Affleck universe? We're hoping that Ben Affleck is going to appear in a lot of the future DCEU films. And I think that's the first part of the question that I take not issue with. It's not your question. Your question was great. I think it's more DC. That part of the question with DC that I take issue with is because, look, it's not any secret that the DCEU in its entirety, starting from Man of Steel, and I believe the last film was, not including the Snyder Cut, was Birds of Prey. The DCEU, just as a whole, as a unit, has been... Oh, I'm sorry, not Birds of Prey, Wonder Woman 1984. But the DCEU as a whole has been... Let's not blunt words. It's been a disaster in terms of, consistency, in quality. And I'm not even just talking about continuity. Like, I'm totally fine with making more standalone films. In fact, we're going to talk about Marvel and why, the whole interconnected thing might be getting a little out of hand. So I'm totally fine with them making an Aquaman film that doesn't really connect to Justice League at all, and that's fine. But there has been just this wild varying in consistency, and these same characters jumping from film to film, being wildly different in each one. Like Harley Quinn started out in Suicide Squad, then she went into Birds of Prey, and then she went into The Suicide Squad. It's like, it's all over the place. So my first thing is that I don't honestly know, first of all, what this Batgirl film is going to be. Is it going to be very closely connected to the Ben Affleck thing, or is it going to be its own separate thing? I think that's the first thing that has to be answered here, right? Is because, look, if you want to make a Batgirl film related to Ben Affleck, then you're clearly going back to the DCEU, and I mean, you can do that, that's totally fine. Or they might just want to be making like a Birds of Prey sort of more standalone film with, a character that's very popular in Batgirl. But the second thing in your question, and the first part of that question, is also an interesting one, and that you say hopefully. So I want to make sure that we understand that Star Wars Galactic is saying hopefully. He's not saying that he being Ben Affleck is going to be in a lot of DCEU films. But I think it's also important to point out that I don't think Ben Affleck is going to be in the DCEU after The Flash. I could be completely wrong. But for those of you who have been following the whole Ben Affleck situation, he started out as, obviously the Batman in Batman v Superman. He went to Justice League. Justice League was a disaster, and at that time it was reported, hey, Ben Affleck is done after Justice League. Then he kind of went back for some Snyder Cut reshoots, and then he was going to make his own Batman film. Then he stepped off from directing the Batman film, but he was still going to act in it, and then he got Matt Reeves to direct it, and then he stepped out of acting it. So, and then obviously later on, he decides to come into the Flash, and in whatever capacity. I don't honestly think that the DCEU is going to touch Ben Affleck's Batman for a while after the Flash, and I do think that Michael Keaton will be the primary Bruce Wayne, at least. I don't think Batman. I think Batman, we'll see what they do, but they might just want Batgirl to be the next sort of Batman figure, which I'm not sure how good of an idea that is, because while I enjoyed Ben Affleck's Batman, I think Robert Pattinson's Batman's going to be excellent. I think if you want a DCEU, and especially if you're going to bring in Superman back at some point with Henry Cavill, which I hope, or they're just going to reboot it with, the J.J. Abrams one. But I feel like, you would want Batman in some capacity. I'm not saying that you don't want Batgirl because you have a Batman. I'm saying you can have both. But I think it's kind of a stretch to say, and I'm just talking about, business numbers. I'm not talking about representation, because I think it's, it's great if you have a Batgirl and have female representation. But I'm saying that obviously more people would be interested in a Batman film than a Batgirl film, because obviously Batman is one of the most popular comic book characters of all time. Like, Hulk versus, like Hulkling, for example. So I just think that we have to kind of figure out where this Batgirl film is in this whole mess of a DCEU right now. Because obviously you have sequels going on, you have Shazam, but then you have the Suicide Squad, which we'll talk about in just a second, which is related to really nothing except having some same characters. So I think that's important to set up first. The second part of your question is, so then Star Wars Galactic says, because it makes a lot of sense in my opinion, to do that. I think that being, having the Batgirl already existing in the DCEU, and then having its own thing. Which again, like I was saying, I think it just depends on what the direction of the DCEU is. It could just be a complete disaster for all we know. Not the Batgirl film, maybe, but the DCEU's direction. But then he says, and then finally, what are you hoping to see from a Batgirl film? That's a really interesting question. I have had very limited exposure to the Barbara Gordon character. I do know a little bit about her. I have seen, I read a little bit of The Killing Joke, but I am not entirely as familiar with her character as, let's just say, obviously Batman. And by the way, on the subject of a Barbara Gordon, we talked about Jim Gordon, right? I don't think it's safe to say even that J.K. Simmons is ever coming back as Jim Gordon in the DCEU. To be fair. So Star Wars Galactic was saying, well, we have a Jim Gordon here, but then we have a Jeffrey Wright there. And like Jeffrey Wright, J.K. Simmons. I don't even know if J.K. Simmons is going to come back in a Batgirl film, or like if they're going to cast a completely different Jim Gordon and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a lot of moving pieces. I will say this. In a Batgirl film, and me not being a super close comic book reader, although I'm a huge fan of obviously the material that's come out of the comic books with the movies and the television shows and all that sort of stuff, I am not entirely familiar with what defines Barbara Gordon as Batgirl. We know that Batman is defined in most things as, not killing, and, in most things, and a vigilante. Bruce Wayne, obviously rich billionaire who works in the Batcave and all that sort of stuff. I am not entirely sure what the defining characteristic of a Barbara Gordon film is. So to be quite honest with you, I'm not expecting anything. And I think for me, as an audience member, as a more casual comic reader, I think for me, if I wanted to see a Batgirl film, I would just say, as long as the story is solid, the action is solid, and as long as they're not trying too hard to make Batgirl the next Batman, because we talked about, what's the Batman situation in the DCEU, or whatever universe this Batgirl film takes place in. As long as they're trying not to, too hard not to make her the next, like, Batman level character, and just have her be Barbara Gordon, have a good Barbara Gordon Batgirl story, I would be totally fine with that. I think that, whatever direction they decide to go in, as long as they make a good, solid film, I'm happy. And honestly, at this point, when with DC, and Warner Brothers, obviously, with the whole business side of it being sold off and all that sort of stuff, it's kind of a huge debacle what to do with the DCEU, and they're just kind of chugging forward into the multiverse a little bit, but it feels less planned than it does for Marvel, where Marvel feels like we have a plan with the multiverse. I feel like for DC, it's more we just don't really know what to do, and we're just gonna chuck the multiverse and try to reset everything, and that's fine. It can work. It works in the comics with the resets and the New 52 and all that sort of stuff. But again, I've been rambling on and on about Batgirl for a while, so we will see exactly what they decide to do. But that is a great question, Star Wars Galactic. Thank you so much for writing in. And yeah, again, guys, if you guys want to make sure that you have a question for the podcast, a topic, then make sure to fill out the Google form, and we will get to that as well.